So now let us listen to God's word from Isaiah 9. Unto us a child is born. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you. As people rejoice at the harvest, as men rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For unto us a child is given, unto us a son is born, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establish and upholding it with justice and righteousness. From that time on and forever, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish it. The word of the Lord.
A couple years ago, Amy and I made our first trip to the big city of Los Angeles. And Amy was there for her good friend's wedding, so she was part of all the activities. And so I had an afternoon free. I Googled some of the top places to see in LA, and one of the top on the list was the Getty Art Museum. So I took a bus from where we were staying in LA and through the meandering hills of California, and I arrived at the parking lot at the Getty. If you've ever been there before, you know you get on this futuristic trolley that takes you to the top of the mountain. And when you arrive, you see this beautiful art exhibit. This massive buildings made out of these huge stones. And as much as the art exhibit was beautiful, the view was even more stunning. As you looked over the valley, you could see downtown LA. There's gardens all over across the grounds. I've never really been to an art gallery before. This was my first time, so I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to do. The thing was free. That was partly why I picked it. That's why I was there. Anyways, as I was arriving and walking through the different exhibits, I was trying to look at others and figure out what do we do at such art exhibits. But what quickly became apparent to me was that there was many other tourists here that were perhaps at their first art exhibit as well. In fact, some of these tourists would go up to every single painting or sculpture and picture, and they would pull out their phone and they would take a picture of it. In fact, it almost became a game for a lot of them, and they would go to every picture, every painting, and they just would take pictures of it as they would go along. And as I watched them rush through each exhibit, I've also felt the pressure, because if you've ever been to the Getty, it's massive. There's several buildings, there's lots of exhibits, there's lots to see, and I also felt the pressure of just consuming it all. And although I was new to this exhibit scene, to me, this didn't feel like the right approach. What was the goal of taking a photo of everything? Were they going to look back at those photos at another time, as we say we will, but we never do? And if the only point of going to this exhibit was taking photos of them, they probably could find high-quality photos of everything they were taking on the internet, and they would never leave their house. But perhaps there's something about slowing down and taking time to see these beautiful paintings in real life and only in time appreciate their unique intricacies. See, the tension that struck me was whether I was supposed to consume all of the art that the Getty offered or somehow sit and appreciate and experience one piece of art at a time. In many ways, we approach Christmas like many tourists do in visiting the Getty. We try to do it all. There are Christmas parties to attend and plan for. There are presents to order, decorations and trees to put up, flights to catch to go see family. The list goes on and on and on. And we rush to get through all of this, all of the planning, all of the details around Christmas, only to collapse after Christmas into a chocolate coma where we're not even sure what day of the week it is or when was the last time that we went outside. Is this the point of Christmas? Is this what Christmas is all about? See, the church for centuries has called the season before Christmas as Advent. And this becomes a rhythm, part of the calendar of the church. And in this ancient rhythm, Advent really means about arrival from the Latin word. And Advent is far more than those chocolate Advent calendars that you're used to. This important rhythm is one that the church calendar is about slowing down to awaken us to the reality of Jesus. The advent of Christmas is the good news that Jesus came and he will come again. Back to the Getty. When I realized I was not going to be able to see it all, I stopped and I slowed down and I sat down. I remember sitting down in one room and there's not very many people in this room, and I just looked at one piece of art. And after a couple minutes, I found myself getting lost in its color and detail and the story that it was sharing. And what I initially would see is, at first glance, I saw so much more than I initially did. Jennifer Roberts, who teaches art history at Harvard University, she has this initial assignment that she gives to the students who are participating in her class. And the assignment is this, that they need to go choose a painting or sculpture in a local museum and go and look at it for 3 hours. 3 hours. No coffee breaks, no social media, no checking email. She reluctantly says that she lets people take washroom breaks, but that's it. You are to go and look at one piece of art for 3 hours. She insists on 3 hours precisely because she knows it is a painfully long time, especially anyone who is accustomed to the life of speed. She goes on, she says, she came up with the exercise because she saw that many of her students face so many external pressures to move fast from digital technology, or to the Harvard's ultra-competitive atmosphere. In one interview, Oliver Burkeman, who was interviewing her, comments, he says this, quote, "It's all too easy to tell yourself that once you've taken a couple of seconds to look at a painting, that you've thereby genuinely seen it. However, if you've ever taken more than a minute to look at great art, you will begin and appreciate things that you didn't initially notice." What if this Advent season you slow down? You slow down so much so that you can dwell on the reality that Jesus has come and is coming again. That the God of the universe became man, the divine became human of cosmic proportion. Oh, what would this possibly mean for your life? Alistair McGrath, who is a theologian from Oxford, one of the most brilliant theologians today, and has written pages and pages of theology of who God is, later in life says this: "I had understood things, but had failed to appreciate them." I had understood things, but I had failed to appreciate them. Does God want to slow you down this Advent season to give you a new perspective to appreciate the Christmas message? Because for many of you in this room, you've had many Christmases. You know the Christmas story. You're familiar with it. You've heard it over and over again. And you've looked at it, so you think you've seen it. But is there more beauty? Is there more detail? Is there more significance to this story for you this Advent season if you just simply would sit with it? See, as a church, we are taking these 4 Sundays before Christmas and looking at the 4 themes of Advent. And these themes will become anchors for us. They will become pieces for the portrait of Christmas for us to soak in and reflect on. And each Sunday we'll light a different candle. And we light these candles as visual reminders for you and I that because Jesus came, that light broke through the darkness, and that no matter how dark life looks, there is light because of Jesus. And today's theme, as Amy mentioned, is the theme of hope. So we're going to look back at that passage that Jim read for us in Isaiah 9. So if you have a Bible, I just invite you to open that up on your lap. But let me give you a runway for where we're going today. We're going to look at Isaiah's hope. We're going to take some time to unpack what he's saying here. And then we're going to look at two common ways of hope, and a third way, which I think is the more biblical way. But as you make your way to Isaiah, let me give you some context to these ancient words. See, so often in places like this, in churches, we read around this Christmas story ancient words. And if you're new to church, you're wondering how impactful or significant these ancient words that we always read. But it's interesting how impactful these words of Isaiah are, because the context in which he's writing them parallels ours in such remarkable ways. See, Isaiah was a prophet. And he was a prophet of Judah specifically, and he lived in the ancient city of Jerusalem, which many of you are familiar with today. And a prophet's role was to be the mouthpiece for God. It was to speak to the Jewish people and about how often, unfortunately, how their lives were functioning against God's desire. But Isaiah lived in a time that wasn't too different from ourselves. Isaiah lived in a time of Judah that was very common to the time we live today. See, in Judah at this time, it experienced one of the most fruitful economic seasons in its history. And you and I live in a time where boomers specifically were the wealthiest generation who have ever lived on the planet. And also, at the time of Judah, they had many decades of relatively peace and military security. And for many of us, for the larger part of a half a century or more, we have experienced peace for this part of the world. Yes, there's been conflicts that pop up at different places in the world, but for the most part, we've experienced relatively peace. However, this time of political and economic and military stability was beginning to fade, and a new reality was setting in for Judah, a reality in which Isaiah comes into the scene of. See, this wealth that Judah experienced wasn't distributed fairly amongst the people. There were those that were the elites who became more and more wealthy, and the corruption of them containing more of the wealth led to many living more in poverty, and wealth wasn't distributed fairly. The 1% were becoming richer, and the majority were becoming less. Sound familiar? Additionally, there were these superpowers that were far from Israel at the time in Judah, but these militaristic superpowers were making noises with neighbors and the nations around them, and their strength and their zeal for more and more conquest became more and more known, and it challenged the long stability of peace that Judah knew. Does that sound familiar? See, throughout the book, Isaiah, these realities became into play, and with powers like Assyria coming in and controlling and compressing the people. And it is in this context, it's in this reality in Judah that Isaiah steps into the scene, and Isaiah receives this commission, this call from God. And if you've never read it before, it's found in Isaiah 6. It's one of the most revelatory interactions with God in the entire Hebrew Scriptures. But in this call, his mission is to speak against the corruption, the injustice that's happening in Judah at this time, and how God will bring judgment based on the actions of those in Judah. But yet, and throughout all of that, sprinkled throughout the entire narrative of Isaiah, are words of hope. Although this to be the reality that the best times of Judah were behind him and the future looked uncertain and unpredictable, and there were many forces coming in to unstable the stability that they experienced for so long, even in the midst of that, Isaiah speaks of a time of hope. Verse 2 of chapter 9. The people walking in darkness, the people in which I'm speaking, the people who are walking in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of a deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation, increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of the oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Isaiah points to a reality that they are not currently living. He speaks of a reality that his original listeners would not comprehend and understand. A reality that would probably seem unfathomable to them. A reality where there would be no more racism, division, oppression, violence, and wars. A time when all darkness will be diminished by a great light. But how, Isaiah? The Syrians are coming in. The Syrians are taking over. How is this possible? Verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. For to us a child is born. What a juxtaposition this is. What a contrast. Something so vulnerable and weak and incapable of even looking after itself, a child, a baby, is somehow to bring an everlasting peace. See, scholars agree here that Isaiah can't be talking about a king and a king that we would think of. It rather appears that Isaiah means an incarnation of God himself. Again, an idea that was incomprehensible for those who were originally listening to this. That God seems to be the only person who can fulfill all these titles of Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The government will rest on his shoulders. That is of epic proportion that only God could seem to meet. As baffling as an idea that would be to the original listeners, hear me, as a baffling idea this would be to the original listeners, it gave them hope. It allowed them to carry on. And roughly 700 years later, Isaiah's utterance of hope became a reality, and Jesus is born, and his birth changes everything. Likewise, as confounding as the idea that Jesus will one day return might sound to our modern day ears, it equally gives you and I hope today, as it did give hope to those before Jesus came. The only difference between us and Isaiah's original audience, the only difference, but a significant one, is that we have the Advent to base our hope on. That Jesus actually did come and dwelt among us, that God became man, Emmanuel. See, Isaiah's message of hope, it still rings true today. It still rings true for you and I. These ancient words spoken in an ancient context, yet strikingly similar to the one we live in today. See, hope is one of the predominant themes of the Christmas story. Anne Voskamp, in her Christmas book called The Greatest Gift, says this: when you really believe in Christmas, you believe there is really hope for everyone. So how do we approach the subject of hope, the realities of hope? See, in my experience, followers of Jesus in churches and places just like this go two predominant ways. And I think both of these ways are a misconception of actually what biblical hope is. So I want to talk about the two predominant ways and then a third way that I believe is the more biblical way, which is in tension with those two. The first predominant way is what I would call over-pessimistic. This narrative has been one that's been present for a long time in the church to some extent. But in my experience, this over-pessimism has become more prevalent as of late. This view sounds something like this. Tell me if you've heard it before. We are in the last days. The world is ending. The culture is turning from God. Things are getting a lot worse, and they're going to get much, much more worse than they already are. See, the primary problem with this rhetoric and this view, besides the actual question whether it's true, maybe is this the worst time in history for the church, or were there worse times to be alive in the world? And also the challenge of a lot of amazing data of how people are experiencing God in profound ways today. Besides those things, the problem with this common view is it's the opposite of what should be the distinguishing mark of the community of faith. What should be distinguishing mark? What should be the identifier of those who are followers of Jesus? What should the church be known for? What will distinguish those who follow Jesus from the rest of the world? Well, it's not being pessimistic. It's not being, I'm just being real and I'm telling you how bad things are. I think pessimism is actually all too common in our world. What is the distinguishing marker of the followers of Jesus is they are people of hope. It's about being hopeful. And sadly, too often, followers of Jesus and even churches are becoming the most pessimistic. That all the error in the room is filled up with telling how bad the world is and how bad things are. Almost my entire family are not followers of Jesus, which makes me certainly the outsider in my family in family settings and family dinners. And not only am I a Christian, I'm one of those extreme type. I'm a pastor, for crying out loud. So they already see me kind of as a black sheep, which is ironic in the family. But I have one family member who actually is a Christian, and a family member which I talk to periodically. But what I've learned over the years is that almost in every conversation, almost every single one, whether it's 5 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour, at some point in that conversation, this family member will begin to tell me about how we are in the last days and how bad life really is. Society's getting bad. This is it, Jordan. This is the end. Now, the ironic thing is I've known this family member for many years. So I've known this person through the decades. And whether it was Y2K or 9/11, the economic crash of '08 or COVID or governments come and go, I've heard this same rhetoric over and over and over again. But yet the church is still carried on. And God still seems to be working. And actually, these conversations are not ones of hope, but they're ones of like, this is it, this is the end, life is getting really terrible. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Of course, there are unique challenges to following Jesus today. And in no way should we be the kind of people who put our heads in the sand and ignore these realities. But my challenge is our primary message one of hope or pessimism? Is hope what we're majoring in? Because I think we can be hopeful people, but still honest with the challenges that are around us. Which leads to the second, I think, predominant way in which we look at hope, and I would call it overconfident. So you have over-pessimistic, then secondly, overconfident. See, too often, I see this confidence in followers of Jesus that can quickly become a sort of arrogance. We become proud of our accomplishments, the success of our businesses or our financial picture. We end up putting all of our hope in the size of our churches or a particular party or leader that we voted in and how they're going to change things to become more of a Christian nation and share greater Christian values, how we win the cultural wars. And subtly, the hope that is communicated to the culture at large, meaning the hope that churches communicate to the culture at large, that when the world looks at the church, what we say, what we are most hopeful for, is not one of a future reality, but a current one. That actually our greatest hope is that a certain Christian values or our own well-being, our own blessing would somehow permeate through the world that we live in today. Oh, Lord, forgive us. Forgive me when our lives have communicated our hopes are in some current reality. And of course, we should have goals, and of course, we need to work towards God's kingdom coming today, but we hold those things loosely. And more importantly, we hold those things humbly. Because we know ultimately that our hope is not in the current reality, but in a future one. Over pessimistic, overconfident. But in the middle of those two, I believe is what our biblical hope is. See, biblical hope is not pessimistic, nor is it misplaced confidence. Biblical hope lives in the tension of the already and the not yet. The already, that the reality that Jesus has come, but the reality that he is coming back. And what's interesting in both sides of the pessimistic and the overconfidence is that they're both putting hope in circumstantial things, aren't they? See, the pessimistic side, they're putting their hope in the reality that things aren't going well, that things look really bad, that therefore they are lacking hope because of that. But the overconfident side is putting hope in the circumstances that things are going really well, that the right party is in office, that their finances look a certain way, that their ministry is a certain way, all these other things. But both aspects of hope have swallowed the cultural lies of reality. See, when you read Isaiah's text here in chapter 9, the language is confusing because in the original language, he uses both present and future verbs. He's speaking in a way that this is a reality now, right now, in this present reality, but he's also speaking in a way that it's also in the future. And here we have the great tension of faith. If you're new to church, if you're exploring Christianity, this is where followers of Jesus live. We live in this tension of faith. Yes, we come into places like this and we stand and we proclaim and we sing and we declare that God became man. That the offer of life entered the narrative, that the Creator became created, that God dwelt among us, Emmanuel. But at the same time, you and I, we still experience oppression and corruption and loss and poverty and injustice and violence and so forth and so on. Biblical hope lives in the tension between the two, of the already and the not yet. See, quick note of the overconfidence and the over-pessimistic. See, the problem with the overconfidence is that this arrogance that we have in our current reality doesn't allow us to slow down and mourn things. See, Advent is an important season because it's an important season for us to slow down, to feel all the emotions, and not to move too quickly into feeling hopeful. See, Advent is a time for you to taking stock of the year. It's about giving space for the different feels that you have, to feel the losses of this year, the losses of dreams, of finances, of relationships, and in some unfortunate cases, of even people. See, once we give space to let those emotions go through our body, then we can anticipate God amidst our challenges. Hope only happens after we feel our longings and disappointment. This is where hope begins. Hope is most needed when life seems so bleak. Hope becomes the most acute when life is at its darkest. Walter Brueggemann, the great theologian, he says this: hope expressed without knowledge and participation in grief is likely to be false hope that does not reach despair. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. It's in the darkness, it's being familiar with those realities, it's giving space to those feelings of loss and mourning, and things didn't turn out the way we thought they would in 2024. It's when dwelling with those that the light and the hope of Jesus becomes so bright. And then on the other side, the problem with just confronting the over-pessimism. See, I would imagine many of the original listeners of Isaiah wanted some hope surrounding the current challenges. That as poetic and beautiful as Isaiah's depiction of a future reality is here, they wanted their current reality to shift. But for many of those living in Judah at the time, their lives got a lot worse, not better. But Isaiah is speaking of a hope that is beyond circumstantial realities. But many of you and I's hopes are in circumstantial ones. We hope for a different outcome for that election, a different outcome with a particular relationship with someone. We hope for that application to be accepted. We hope for our investments to increase at a greater percentage. We hope for that work to look different than what it did. Circumstantial hope. And so much of circumstantial hope is out of our control. Again, Walter Brueggemann says this: hope is the refusal to accept the reading of reality which is the majority opinion. Hope is the refusal to accept the reading of how people see reality to be, which is what the majority of people see it to be. See, the biblical understanding of hope is having hope when, humanly speaking, things are hopeless. We don't have hope because everything is looking like it's going to work out. Our hope is not circumstantial. I'm going to invite the keys to come, and I'm closing with this. As we approach this beautiful season of Advent, and as you get your shopping in order and the trees go up and you drink your eggnog, what are you inviting the Lord to consider? What are you inviting the Lord to anticipate in your own life with his coming? See, for myself, I didn't grow up with the rhythm of Advent. And even the church I was part of for many years, it wasn't a significant part in the church rhythm. But in the last few years, Advent has become this habit that I enjoy and I hunger for every year. Because I need to slow down. I need an intentional rhythm for me to slow down and to take stock of the year and to spend and dwell with the reality of the incarnation of Jesus and what does that mean for today. So a few questions for you this morning. What do you need to give space to? What do you need to give space to grieve this Advent? What have you hoped for or dreamed about that didn't come into fruition? Have you lost hope this season? Have you lost hope, or have you misplaced that hope? Have you put it in circumstantial things and have seen it falling apart? How can you, not your neighbor, not someone else, but how can you, in this Advent season, be reminded of the everlasting hope? The hope that will remove all oppression, war, poverty, and injustice. How can you be reminded of this hope in which we base our faith and our being in? I'm going to invite you to stand if you're able, and the team's coming and we're closing up here. Inviting our prayer team to come this morning. And as we just sing one more song and close our service, I just want to invite you to participate by responding to those questions I asked this morning. And maybe 2024 was a hard year for you. Maybe this season is one that's really challenged your hope and you just find yourself becoming more and more hopeless. Our team is here and they would love to pray with you. Maybe you came with a friend or a colleague or a spouse. Would you just take time as we sing? Would you invite God into this space? And one of the most intentional ways we can do that is prayer. That's why every Sunday we give you the invitation to come and receive prayer. Because if you're walking today and you're feeling this grief, this heaviness, this hopelessness, why wouldn't you let God into that space and invite someone to pray with you this morning? So our team is here. Amy and myself are here. We would love to pray with you. But let us not be too much in a hurry to not take time to dwell on the reality that Jesus has come and is coming again. So Holy Spirit, we invite you into this space. Heavenly Father, would your presence just be so palpable today? Lord, I just pray for broken hearts. I pray for lost dreams. I pray for weariness in this room. Lord, I just pray that your joy and your hope and your peace would just be so tangible today. God, would you meet us in our lack? I pray that in this season of Advent that we would all slow down, that we wouldn't assume that because we've seen the photo, that we've seen the picture of Christmas, that we have dwelt and fully internalized its significance in our lives. So Holy Spirit, would you speak to us personally this morning? Would you encourage us personally today? Would you meet us this morning? May we be reminded that God is amongst us, Emmanuel.